Hey, welcome everyone. This is the second and I believe final meeting of a Government Transition Advisory Committee work group on additional recommendations. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, and we'll be here from 12 to 1:30. My name is Julia Meyer, and I work at the City of Portland on the transition team. I will help facilitate today's meeting, but we're a small group, so hopefully we can be pretty conversational. And maybe at a point when I pause, I might just text the few other work group members, see if they're on their way. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just take a moment to go over some meeting logistics. This is a virtual meeting. The meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted on the city's transition website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, you can click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks in attendance can view the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For any community members participating, we have the Q&A feature available in Zoom. You can submit questions or comments through the Q&A function. And the Q&A is a part of the public meeting record. We are not taking verbal public comment during this meeting, but if you want to give public comment to the Government Transition Advisory Committee, you could sign up now to do so at the next full meeting on February 11th, or you can submit public comment at any time by calling 311, using our online public comment form, or by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. Next slide, please. So today's agenda is simple, but has a lot in it. We're just going to start really brief overview of kind of where we are and where we're headed. And then really the bulk of the time is for you to agree to the additional recommendations that you want forwarded to GTAC for GTAC's consideration and vote. And then we have a little bit of time held at the end to consider any changes that this work group might want to propose to the priority issues that GTAC has already identified for city leaders. Before we leave, I'll just go over some next steps and upcoming meetings. Next slide, please. I think everyone's supposed to be here. We're maybe just waiting on Juanita, but I think the rest of you are all here. Thank you for that. We do need to approve the January 10th meeting summary from this work group. I sent it out a week ago, I think. Does anyone have any corrections you want to put out there before I ask for a motion? Could I get a motion from someone to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. A motion from Fred. Could I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Juliet. For all those in favor, can you raise your Zoom hand or your actual hand? Thank you. So the meeting summary from January 10th is approved. Appreciate that. Let's go on to the next slide. This, I promise, is my last slide before we talk about the fun part of the recommendations. So I just wanted to kind of remind folks about where we've been and where we're going. So I guess 2 GTAC meetings ago, the full committee approved a motion to create this time-limited work group to consider any additional recommendations that would be brought to the GTAC no later than its February 11th meeting. You all met once back on January 10th and identified 4 recommendations that were ripe for drafting. On January 14th, the work group, I think Jose provided a update on this work group's work, and we heard some, I think, really helpful feedback from GTAC members about where you all were headed. Volunteers have been working on the drafting of the recommendations. Terry, Fred, Juanita, apologies if I missed anyone, so thank you for that. We sent them out, the draft recommendations, last week. Today will be probably our final meeting, so we really need to leave the meeting with you all agreeing on the recommendations that you want forwarded to GTAC. We'll send those out on February 4th in anticipation of the February 11th GTAC meeting, where there's time held on the agenda for the work group to present its work and for GTAC members to consider your proposals and to vote on the recommendations. Any questions, comments, clarifications before we move into the discussion of the recommendations? Pretty good. That all sound familiar? Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so next slide, please, Guillermo. So last week I sent the 4 draft recommendations. As a reminder, my shorthand, they cover kind of cost savings, the budget report, code commission, and advisory bodies. I will note on Saturday, Juanita sent some suggested edits to the budget report recommendation. I can show you those if you hadn't had an opportunity to review them. I think they're mostly kind of a framing grammar type of edits. So here's how I think we're going to proceed through these. So we have an actual Word document with the drafted recommendations. Guillermo, you can take down this slide deck. So Guillermo's going to actually pull up the Word document. I might briefly ask for the drafters as we go one by one to share kind of any thinking that went into this draft or things that changed since we were here last time. And then we can open it up for sort of member questions, comments. And what we're really kind of moving towards is if any of you have proposed changes to what the draft is, I'll capture them on a separate document. And when you're kind of concluded proposing any changes, I can bring up those changes and you can kind of talk through which of the changes you want to approve. And then we'll kind of vote on recommendations as we go. So if we finish recommendation 1, I'll ask you to vote on that, and then we'll kind of move on to number 2. We don't have to take equal amount of time for each recommendation, but just to give you a sense, if we did, it's a little less than 15 minutes, kind of 12, 13 minutes per recommendation. So if we start to be way over, I'm going to ask us to wrap up because I really want to make sure we get to all 4. Does that make sense? Okay, Guillermo, you're gonna have to make that way, way bigger.
There we go.
Can folks, that looks perfect to me. I don't have great eyesight. Can folks read that? Okay. Can I just have Terry and Fred, you both took a stab at some drafting work here. I'll let either or both of you, if you just want to briefly share any thoughts that went into this drafting, and then we'll open it up to other members. And I'm going to text Juanita real quick while you're doing that.
Okay, we went through the meeting notes and looked at the chat and some of the discussion. Tried to combine how reduce, be less specific about how to find cost savings, and just said these are opportunities to identify redundant services that can be consolidated, thereby eliminating unnecessary costs. And then to talk about to incorporate it into a public process that brings to bear the public, that the entire apparatus, mayor, administrator, and council should actively and publicly begin identifying those efficiencies and how they can be incorporated into the budget process, either through a full council work session or appropriate committee work session. And I know that the city administrators already talked about, we've all read this memo, and there's going to be more forthcoming. But so I don't know whether this is timely or passe or appropriate. Terry, I know would like us to start. Apparently, the foreman's style is to start with an active verb, and so it would just say identify opportunities for eliminating unnecessary costs, either by eliminating or consolidating redundant services, such as eliminating redundant services or consolidating redundant services. If you wanted to change the grammar, I just had a grammatical brain fart at the time we were wordsmithing this. And now I have a migraine, so have at it, folks. Terry?
Yeah, that sounds great. That's a perfect description. I from the full GTAC meeting, we were advised to, tie it to the transition, and I think that was the main emphasis that I wanted to do in our edit, and it's captured here. Um, Starting with the verb would be great, but I don't need to wordsmith it right now.
Thank you to the drafters. So yeah, now we'll take questions, comments. And if you do want to propose a change at this point, just let me know you're proposing a change and I'll specifically capture that. We'll go Bill and then Jose.
Oh, thank you, Julia. I had a question on the last part, either through a full council or appropriate committee work session. The sentence begins asking the mayor, administrator, and council. So that's both executive and legislative functions. Now, they either through a full council or appropriate committee work session. Appropriate committee, I was thinking that was a council committee. And if I were reading that correctly, that's legislative, not what the mayor could do. So I'm just asking about the necessity of that last phrase, that clause.
Well, Terry had recommended that there be the whole issue be studied by the finance committee. And I'm not sure that I thought that was a little too specific. And so that's why we captured it this way. The mayor and the administrator, especially the administrator, is involving the council, keeping them apprised of the budgetary constraints they're facing and of the options that he and the mayor at the bureaucracy is considering. And so and I think sometimes that's good. I think there will be a presentation, I believe, coming up, if I'm right, Julia, of the city administrator addressing the full council in an informational session, something about additional savings or cuts. I don't know how you want to phrase that. Cuts, efficiencies, if you will, and that'd be full council. So it is. I think we've looked at this the way we've recommended, and I'll let Juanita speak for herself. It's when talking about the budget process that they involve the public both at the formulation of the budget through the administrator and mayor, and to the council deliberations. And obviously, they would have probably a committee dealing with it, and the council president would determine which committee was appropriate.
Okay, so we have a lot more hands. I want to make sure we get through. I'm not yet hearing a proposed change. And I will say as a reminder, I think this part, the end of the final sentence came from a recommendation from Juliet, I believe, in the first work group meeting, that there should be a public meeting where this conversation happens. If anyone has a good proposed change, put your hand up. Jose.
Okay. I don't want to throw a wrench, but I do think we need to acknowledge the things that are happening so that our recommendations don't sound that they're out of date the moment they come out. So saying that we want them to begin this process feels like it would instantly be not looked at all. So I think we do need to rewrite it to acknowledge that they have begun this process and maybe ask that this process continue, and acknowledge the fact that this might not be a quick process, that it might take a long time to get through all the bureaus and identify all these things, which I know is a complete rewrite. So there is a change on that. But I do think we need to acknowledge that and make it evident in our work. That even if in the past they haven't paid attention to us, we should always show that we are paying attention to them.
Thanks, Jose.
If I can respond to that, I think that's a great idea, Jose. I would just delete begin and say should actively and publicly identify those efficiencies.
Yeah, Fred, I'm gonna recommend if we can get the
Okay.
proposed
Yeah.
changes and
not wordsmith it as we go. Yeah.
yeah, and I think when
Right.
it's right to have a motion on any recommendation, would hope maybe that the motion could include some guidance for someone or a couple of people to do the wordsmithing on the work group's behalf. Thank
Agreed.
you, Jose. Amy.
You're on
Amy,
mute.
you're
Amy.
muted.
And will I learn? Two ideas. One, adding recognize as the opening line. Recognize the transition to a de-siloed administration provides opportunities. So it's more like a suggestion, and that does the verb thing. And then I agree about lopping off the either through a full council or appropriate committee work session. And we could add like in public or involving the public or something like that, because it feels overly prescriptive, exactly like you just said.
Thanks, Amy. Juliet.
Yep, I concur with Amy. I'll take my hand down.
Love it. Any other proposed changes on this one? Okay, there's only three. I do have them on a slide. I think they're easy enough for me to read back, but if anyone wants to see them, please let me know. So there's three of them. One is start with a verb. That is our style. With a specific recommendation, we could begin with recognize the transition to blah, blah. Number two is to add an acknowledgement that the city has already begun this work and that we're asking for this work to continue, and to recognize that it may take some time. And then number three is to delete the end of the final sentence, either through a full council or appropriate committee work session to something more general, like in a public setting or that allows for public involvement. Jose, was that?
I was just gonna say that the little publicly word is very important to make sure we like. Yeah, but you mentioned it at the end, so yes.
In a public meeting.
Yep, got it. Oh, Fred? You're muted.
We said publicly, I think it's intriguing. And I think we should consider this idea of recognizing that it's going to take time. That's going to fold us into the strategic planning process, I think, where we hope that the council who's strategic planning with the mayor and the council and the administrator are going to come up with how to prioritize the cuts in the long term. I think we just should keep that in mind as we get into the next recommendation.
Were you proposing a change to what we just agreed to?
Well, I think it's maybe it'll take some time. We think that there's I'm afraid there's some urgency in finding the $60 million in general fund cuts by June 30. And that is not going to allow for time for strategic planning on priorities. So yes, it will take, overall, it's going to take years to de-siloize the ridiculously overburdened and top-heavy bureaucracy. So I don't know whether over time is the right is temporal enough for considering the urgency of the shortfall and the need for them to kick into action.
Okay, I see Jose's hand. I don't think those are in conflict with each other. I think it's easy to say both. This is not going to be concluded after one single budget cycle. And it does take time to fully realize the cost savings of a new form of government. And there's urgency that some of those savings are found in the current budget cycle. Jose.
Yeah, I was just gonna say what you said to Fred. The importance of putting overtime is so that they don't stop at June 30th because it's urgent and they don't continue even if they didn't finish. Or they continue but not public, right? So we want everything to be continue until it's done, regardless of the time.
Right. Do we have
Got
a,
it.
do you read it's a question to Jose. Anyway, I'm not sure that I put in enough urgency. Are we reading urgency in the language we
I
have?
think we'd have to add the urgency with the time. Like, I think time, it will be a new addition, and time can be both urgency and
Okay.
recognition that it isn't immediate.
Good, thanks.
Okay, do folks need me to repeat the 3 changes with the added change to the second one? No? Okay. Can someone give me a motion? Terry?
Move this recommendation as amended and wordsmith.
Thanks, Terry. Can I have a second?
Second,
Thank you, Bill. All those in favor, hands virtual or actual? Okay, that's unanimous. Does someone want to work with me on the wordsmithing, or do you want me to do it? Terry, Terry and Bill?
sure.
Okay, thank you so much. We're gonna move on.
Dear.
I'm still trying to get Juanita. So can we skip to number 3? I'm gonna hope to have her, and if not, we'll just have to come back. Okay, so this one is a little bit longer. It's establish a code commission, though it's very, very similar to the initial language. Terry, if I can ask you just to briefly share kind of any changes, I think maybe it was the one change that you made since the initial proposal. Thanks.
Yeah, the main change came out of the GTAC meeting was, to recognize this is not an urgent thing, and that we can take our time and let the transition settle down and all of that sort of stuff. So I rearranged a couple sentences, and so now, like this, where is it? The second sentence. Role and purpose of the commission would be to be sure that the extremely detailed but low priority work of code hygiene, blah, blah, blah. So that was just a way to acknowledge that low priority. Other than that, it was the same as you saw at the GTAC meeting. Didn't get much input other than that.
That's great. Thank you, Terry. Questions or comments? Jose?
I guess I just have a question on why would you choose to have it be a permanent commission versus a long-standing temporary one until that work is done?
Because in most jurisdictions, the work is never done. And it requires ongoing maintenance in general. I know a couple jurisdictions put the authority for code maintenance on a particular person, and they get named, the code czar. But we don't have a particular person to do that. So but it is a permanent job. Every ordinance that comes out of the council needs to be put into the code appropriately. So that's the reason. And the fact that, we went through it just to swap out commissioner in charge and put in, city administrator, and realize that the code it's just a ton of work still to do. So I think it's good to have permanent presence on this.
Thanks, Terry. Julia.
So I understand the point about this is not urgent, but I don't think we should leave it completely open-ended. Can we put a time frame like, you know, within the next year or something like that? Otherwise, it probably won't happen.
Thanks, Juliet. Fred.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we should add the auditor as an ex officio member because they certainly look at how the bureaus are administering the codes that they're responsible for. And her voice or her designee might be informative ex officio. My experience with what I've seen from the city attorney's office, not from the city attorney himself, but some staffers over the last year and a half, has been that they need to learn to write more modern language and leave out a lot of the wherefores and henceforths and theretos. And but we don't need to talk about that in our recommendation.
Yeah, the
Thanks,
auditor-
Fred.
I like the idea of having a city attorney or designee being ex officio.
Got it.
The auditor is a good addition.
Yeah.
Thank
Bill.
you.
Oh, thank you, Julia. Yeah, Terry, I wonder whether some of the code changes might be higher than low priority. I'm not thinking of a particular example, but, I could envision that, there might be some conflict of the code with what the council or mayor want to do. I realize the charter reform, approved probably, is prevails over any conflict with the code, but there might be some things that would be higher priority.
Bill, are
Yeah,
you? Oh,
In just a quick response. Yeah, I think you're probably right, but I think a code commission can figure that out.
But the sentence that you added says, would be sure that the extremely detailed, oh, I see, it doesn't say that all work is low priority. It just ensures that work that is low priority gets done. Is that how I read that sentence? Okay. Thank
all
you.
right. Bill, are you okay with the language then, or did you want to
Yes.
propose a change to that sentence? Okay, thanks. Anything else?
I'll move it as amended for the auditor. And
Can we get both? So let me just go back over. I heard two proposed changes. The first one was, I think, Juliet, to add some sort of time frame for formation. And suggested something like within the next year. I don't know if we want to talk more about that. And then the second proposed change was at the last sentence as an ex officio to add the auditor or their designee.
yeah, that's fine.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you want to make a motion now?
Yeah, as amended, I'll move that language.
Thank you, Terry. Could I get a second? Amy?
Second.
I'm gonna take Amy. All those in favor, Zoom hand. Fred, are you still here to vote?
Yes, I am. Yes, I vote yes.
Yes, you're here, and yes, you're voting yes. Okay, thank you
Yeah.
so much. So that passes. Does anyone want to take responsibility with me for number 2 drafting? Terry. Gotcha. Okay, let's move Guillermo to the number 4.
No.
Okay, so this one is a bit longer. Terry, why don't you talk at us first, and then maybe I'll give folks listen to Terry, and then I'll give folks a minute or two to actually read through it, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Terry?
Yeah, basically, based on the discussion at GTAC and the fact that we had multiple recommendations embedded in one big advisory commission, advisory body recommendation, I kind of rewrote a lot of it to try and capture all of the things. You know, to capture the who's responsible for what, capture centralization and standardization, um, recruitment, all of the issues that came up in the conversation. So now it's one recommendation that, we'd review and reform the overall approach to advisory bodies in the new form of government context. And then the bullets below it are what we're talking about, basically.
Thanks, Terry. So why don't, I'll give folks a minute, and then I think we're not seeing the whole thing, so maybe in about a minute, we'll scroll down a little bit further. Are folks okay if Guillermo just scrolls down to the final bullets? Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Give folks another like 30 seconds, and we'll talk about it. Okay, are folks all right if we start chatting? Okay. Bill. Bill, you're muted if you're speaking.
This muting is contagious. I was going to ask Guillermo if you could scroll up to the third bullet. I had a question for Terry on the third one about clarifying the response. Oh, in particular, define the role and responsibilities of the Office of Community and Civic Life. Now, I'm reading that not to say we're supposed to define that we want to define the entire role and responsibilities of these entities. It's only with respect to management of advisory committees. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. I think that was my point, and I meant as it pertains to advisory committees, bodies.
Okay. Yeah, maybe a additional phrase saying that might be helpful. But yeah, thank you.
We can add that as a proposed change, Bill. Thank you. Amy.
I wrote this before when I was preparing, and I don't know if I feel as strongly about it now, but I thought this bullet point might be a good vehicle for the just having one more line about mapping to the community engagement plan or something. And I just suggest adding a bullet point, consider mapping advisory bodies to ongoing renewed community engagement plan. And then adding a line at the end of the bolded text and the at the top that says and renewed emphasis on system-wide community relations. I'll drop this in the chat.
Yeah, Amy, I think I got this I don't think I got the final one, so if you put that one in the chat, that would be great. Jose.
Yeah, mine's that two. One that's kind of off what Amy's saying. I think one of the very first bullet points should be something to the effect that this advisory bodies is one of the main ways that the city can does community engagement. We should acknowledge that and call that out right at the beginning, especially since so many city council members are so gung-ho about city community engagement at this point. We should point that out with these very explicitly, in my opinion. And also, there's a comment about stipends later on. And I know I have this issues, and I've talked to other people that have this issue, but there's certain demographic of people that can't take the stipend, or it'll affect their disability, their aid, their X number of things because of it. So I don't know if we could do, say, stipends or travel reimbursements or anything like that that might help people attend those things, because if it's a reimbursement for travel or for expenses, that's different than a stipend, which is considered income.
Great, got both of those. Jose, Fred.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Jose's point on the last one we discussed. After reading that report of this advisory committee work group, it looks like they've already sunsetted some obsolete or ineffective, inactive advisory committees, and are looking at how to approach the rest of them, and to come up with some systematic approach for recruitment and acknowledgement of the need for diversity and inclusion. And maybe we need to recognize that those efforts are underway somehow, as Jose pointed out on the budget efficiencies, the administrative efficiencies. I think that to his point on the first sentence, I think that's pretty explicit about the need, and compelling about the need to involve the community in systemically in the city.
Thank you, Fred. Jose.
I get it says community engagement in there, but I want to point out, not that just an integral element. I want to point out, like, flat out say that advisor bodies are one of the main ways we do community engagement in our city, not make it so obtuse in this statement so that anyone reading it, be it a city council member or a person that's testifying that day, that has never been part of government before. Because I know at the last two meetings, I was sitting next to people that never been involved with, never testified before, never watched a city council meeting. I want them to be able to read it and know exactly what we mean by it.
And I see there's an agreement, I think, from Amy. Any other comments, questions, or proposed changes? Okay, this is 6 of them. Do folks need to see them on the screen, or is it okay if I repeat them back to you?
I think repeating them back should be good. I have 6 too.
Fred?
Yeah, I remember that there'd been some discussion at the GTAC meeting about recommending that they create an advisory committee on advisory committees. And and I kind of, that resonated with me. I just seemed like that didn't seem necessary if the Office of Community Engagement and the Engagement Officer did their job well, which isn't guaranteed, I know.
Is the proposal to delete the final bullet?
Yes.
Okay,
You know, let me just speak to that one because I don't want you to do that. And partly for the reason that Jose just mentioned, you know, advisory bodies are how you do community engagement work around here frequently. And I think people who are been serving on advisory bodies would have good advice in standardizing and centralizing. So that's why it's in there.
does anyone want to, else want to weigh in on the final bullet that you see on the screen right now?
Now that we've scrolled down so I can read it again, I consider assembling, and it's an ad hoc work group. I haven't got a problem with that language, Terry. Thank you.
Okay, Julia, do you still want to speak to it?
Yeah, just, I think ad hoc solves that problem.
Great. Yeah, I do think the language has shifted a little bit from Terry's kind of initial framing. Okay, let me kind of read them back. Apologies, they're not really in order. So the first is that in bullet 3, this was Bill, clarify when we're talking about defining the responsibilities, for example, of civic life. In this context, we mean pertaining to advisory bodies. Number 2 is add a bullet point. This is from Amy. It's in the chat about consider mapping advisory bodies to ongoing renewed community engagement plan. Number 3 is changing the title, the underline part of the recommendation, which adds the connection with a renewed emphasis on system-wide community relations. The 4th is to, I think, be more clear in the first bullet that advisory bodies are a main way that the city conducts community engagement. Number 5 is to expand the part about stipends to include expense and travel reimbursement. And the 6th and final change is to add an acknowledgement, similar actually to the first recommendation, add an acknowledgement that there are efforts underway. It's like those documents I sent you from Civic Life, that there's been an inventory, that they're sunsetting some obsolete advisory bodies, etc. Does that well summarize the proposed changes? Can I get a motion?
I'll move all of that as amended.
Second.
Thank you. Terry moves, Fred seconds. All those in favor, I'll take a hand of any kind.
Yeah.
Amy, are you a no? Or are you pondering? Okay, that's unanimous in support. Terry, should I pre-assign you, or does anyone else want to work with me on incorporating the 6 recommendations? Okay, thank you. So the final one is going back up to number 2. It looks like Juanita's not going to join us. So I'll just say I'm not. She shared these recommended changes in an email to you all on Saturday. I put them here as red line, though I do think. Guillermo, can you scroll down for me for a minute? I don't, in my opinion, I don't think these are substantive. They really are, okay, I take that back. So, they are generally kind of what I would consider wordsmithing. I would recommend, kind of to Terry's earlier point, several of these or maybe most of them are not in our typical framing of a verb. So I think that's something we might want to talk about. I think the only substantive change from her initial proposal is the bottom bullet red line, which says budget office staff should only provide recommendations as requested or when pertaining to issue areas that the budget office has the authority to manage. So apologies that we can't ask Juanita to speak more. I think she did explain this recommendation generally at our first work group meeting. So I'll just open it up for discussion. Terry.
Yeah, I rewrote a version of this, and Juanita did not want her version edited, so I'm sitting on it, and I have it. Um, my issue with what is being proposed here is, one, it's too prescriptive, but two, the again, as Jose pointed out early, they're doing some of this stuff and actually doing a lot of it, but it's not in an organized way, really. They're implementing what they can when they can. They're going to get around to the strategic planning when they can. They have sort of some weasel words that they're going to do that. A lot of the early stuff is happening. So my preference would be to go to a very simple recommendation that says something along the lines of, and I have, like I said, I have some language, but something along the lines of, there's, just create a plan for implementing these things that are in the report, and leave it at that, because the report can stand for itself, and all of these things that Juanita has as bullets are in the report. But that's my preference. It's not Juanita's preference. So I don't know. I'll put some language in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Bill.
Oh, thank you, Julia. Yeah, I would respectfully disagree with that last bullet because, I'm thinking if budget staff has some opinions, if they got a responsible, opinion, I don't want to limit them on what they would say. I would want to hear them. That would be one observation. The other was right at the beginning, Juanita added the phrase "and correct." And then that triggers to me correcting what? So it raises a lot of questions to me. So that would be a concern to me also.
Oh, in the actual
Yeah, the proposed,
title.
yeah, in the first line to correct and.
Terry, is that
Well, excuse me, Julie, I was going to say before, we've recommended, we already have a recommendation to implement, that report. And here I see correct, and I said, oh, are we disagreeing? Is there something we want to change? So that raised a lot, questions to my mind. So I favor deletion, or at least if we want to keep it in, what are we correcting?
yes, I wrote it down. I am gonna I'll make a guess that I think it's more like if there's a finding in the report that is something not good, it's like correct the thing that's not good that was found. It would be probably my interpretation. But I took your point and wrote it down. Fred.
Yes, I think I've mentioned this before, that I don't know that it behooves us to say, do a strategic plan now and make the budget process conform to the priorities you identify in your strategic plan. We have a whole new council. They're caught in the halfway through the current budget, having to deal with some enormous shortfalls in a budget that they've got to adopt no later than May, if not April. And I don't know that gives any chance to do a strategic plan on top of all of that. They hardly know each other, let alone the city and all of the services it provides or could provide or should not continue to provide. And that's all inherent in a strategic plan. So complete a multi-year citywide strategic plan. I just think, and complete, I mean, continue or push or somehow add some urgency to it, but some acknowledgement that that ain't going to happen in the next 6 months, folks.
Thanks. I'm just writing that down. Any other comments or questions? Sorry.
Just, I have the general stuff in the chat. I also put some bullet points that I'm not particularly interested in. But if it were a way to address some of Juanita's bullets in a way that was less prescriptive, I included those in the chat too. But I can go either way on those.
Jose, I'll take your hand in 1 second. Guillermo, is it possible? Well, are folks interested in seeing Terry's in a document form, or are folks okay with it in the chat? Okay, it seemed, oh, go ahead. Well, hold on, let me take Jose and then I'll come back. Jose, go ahead.
I was just gonna talk to the one about Terry mentioned, the one that got replaced with complete a strategic plan is the first one. I feel like not only is that what Fred said, but putting complete a strategic plan completely changes it from establish a budgeting process based on the results. A process is something that can be carried on to later budget cycles, and it's completely different than a plan for a particular cycle. So I don't like that change at all personally. I like it better that we're recommending for processes to be established that will be long term and help the city in years to come, not just at the moment.
Wait, Jose, let me make sure I understand. You're saying you're proposing a change to bullet 3?
No, the first. See, so the first one used to say established, so she moved it down to the third one.
Yeah, I think she's just separating them. Complete a strategic plan and then establish your budget process based on the strategic plan.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure I captured your proposed change.
yeah. The thing is, by saying it has to be based on a strategic plan that they may or may not complete, it might not help them establish. What I'm trying to say is that the process to me is more important than a plan that they have very little time to complete. I'd rather them work on a process that may say establish a plan down the line than to say complete a plan and then work on a process. I don't agree with saying you have to complete a plan like Fred said.
Okay, so it's not really in contradiction to Fred's proposed change of begin a strategic planning process. It's that
No, it's in opposition
establish it.
of Juanita's fixes. Right.
Okay, I think I'll repeat it back when we get to the proposed changes. Fred.
Yeah, I like Terry's rewording of it, and I think that handles that issue by his first bullet: commit to a citywide strategic planning process and schedule and begin work. But I don't, and I would ask Terry about his third bullet. If people could read it in the chat and have commit to the specific process reforms in the report, capital R report, and implement them in the current cycle. Which report are we referring to, and what would happen? Is you talking about the current cycle, meaning as they adopt the 25-26 budget? Is that what's
This
current
whole
cycle?
this whole, I can let Terry speak to the second point around timing, but this
Thanks.
whole recommendation that Juanita drafted is about ensuring that the city acts on
Oh.
the consultant report that
The budget
farm
report, right?
of the city
Right.
did.
All right, that makes sense. Yeah, and that's great. I think Terry's language is succinct, recognizes that it ain't going to happen tomorrow, but they need to start work on it, and that needs to be prioritized and full what does result from the strategic planning process needs to be integrated into the budgeting process with public engagement. So I like Terry's language. I hope Juanita can accede to it. But if we all voted in favor of it now, that would be the recommendation. And it does capture her intent, I believe, without being, as Terry said, overly prescriptive.
Thank you, Fred. Any other comments, questions, proposed changes? Okay, I'm gonna repeat back the proposed changes that I heard, and then I'll ask if someone wants to make a motion. I have 5. So the first is to simplify the recommendation. The second is to delete the last bullet. That was the one about what the budget office should provide recommendations on. The third is to delete or clarify the word correct in the title of the recommendation. The fourth is to change completing a strategic plan to something like begin a strategic plan or commit to doing a strategic plan. And the fifth and final is to prioritize establishing the budget process that's not dependent on the creation of the strategic plan. I hope, Jose, I got that. Is that a head nod? Are those the proposed changes on the table? Fred?
Yeah, I think other than the issue of deleting to correct and implement, which we could just delete, I would move that we adopt Terry's version of this recommendation now.
Thank you, Fred. Could I get a second? Or is there a second? Terry seconds. Any discussion about that? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, that is unanimous. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Terry or anyone, I'm not sure I heard any proposed changes to the language that Terry put in the chat. And I guess I don't necessarily mean huge substantive changes, but did I miss anything that someone recommended? No. Okay.
No, the one thing, Julia, that just to clarify that in my motion, it included deleting the change in the title to the recommendation to delete correct and.
Oh, can I get a hands up for people? Was that folks understanding? Amy?
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Fred.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for that. Guillermo, thanks for sharing this document. Could you put the document down? And then if you could put the slide deck back up, we are ahead of schedule. So thank you all for that. If you could go to slide 11, it's called Consider Changes. Yep, that's perfect. So we did our main task, for sure. I think if we left with what we had just done, I think you fulfilled what the committee had asked. I will say, and Amy, I think it might have been you. I heard this from really clearly, but both at the first work group meeting and when the work group did its report out to all of GTAC at the last meeting, I feel like Amy wasn't the only one, but I feel like there were several references to this idea of whether GTAC needs to prioritize all of the recommendations that it has. I think there's different ways to prioritize things. And it made me realize that one, folks might have forgotten we already sort of did that, but it was a few months ago. So back in November, we actually asked members in a public GTAC meeting to identify what their priority issues are for the new city leadership. And then as we're creating the final report for GTAC, we have a group of members who are volunteer drafters of that report. And one GTAC member took what they heard in the round robin of members and drafted it into this priority issues section. The final report is not finalized, but it made me think that I don't think it would be sort of out of the scope necessarily of this work group if you did want to make any recommendations related to the prioritization that happened previously, or if it's just something you would float as a topic of conversation at the February GTAC meeting. So I sent those priority issues out to you with this meeting material. I'm not going to go through it all. But if you go to the next slide, Guillermo, there were 4 buckets that they fell under, and there's a lot of sub bullets of each of these. If folks need us to bring up that document, we could probably do so. But the 4 big buckets were strategic planning, structure, communications, and community engagement. So I just wanted to see, I didn't want to let go, I guess, of a thread I was sensing in a couple conversations, if there was anything here that folks wanted to discuss. And yeah, Amy, I'll take your hand. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder about the last November work that happened on this. I think I'd mostly forgotten about that. I volunteered to help with this, but my revision on this document, the vision I had for this prioritization was really temporal, like, which I think is sort of what you were just highlighting. And I think that the reason that I brought it up was because I was thinking about people needing to go at it in like time-based. So I volunteer to help structure it that way, if that's what the committee kind of thinks. But I feel really strongly that if we're going to share these prioritized, to me, this document makes it like it's more information, not like the information you already have. Here's a timeline of when we would recommend enacting it, because that was a little bit more of what I specifically had in mind with this particular recommendation document.
Thanks, Amy. Anyone else on Amy's point or anything else related to priority issues? Fred.
Well, I mean, I know these are just 1 or 2 words, and I think they're all important. Structure might need I haven't looked at the document itself, and I understand. I mean, I just want it to somehow recognize that it's a new form and it needs to be more efficient and less siloized. I'm still getting feedback from former city budget managers and administrators that the bureaucracy is winning over this, and that the current administrator, I know this is being recorded, I'm trying to be tactful, isn't prepared to enforce efficiencies through any kind of restructuring, other than shoving the extant 28, 26 or 28 agencies into 6 service areas, and then not eliminating any top management positions, but just creating 6 new deputy city administrators. And so to me, I don't know how much of that we're including under structure as a priority item. I think it's inherent in strategic planning, and we've talked about it in the recommendation we made about identifying efficiencies today. But but just the word structure doesn't inform me. I'm sorry.
Jose, I'll take your, just, so, yeah, if, folks wanna pull it up, it would probably be helpful. I didn't put it all in a slide, but there's a significant number of, specifics under each, so structure right now, though, does not currently address Fred's suggestion. It is, I'd say, much more focused on council. And then kind of budget, something that I'll put in the chat. Jose.
Yeah, I recognize we did this a while ago, but I think as I've seen things start taking shape within the new council, I'm guessing my responses might be different than they were a few months ago, based on what's happening now and what we've seen. I don't know if that would change for others, because for me, process and structure is probably number one right now, because that's all they're doing. They're doing a lot of work around establishing some of that structure and those processes. And since there might be felt for a very, very long time, I would probably put it much higher priority than I would have earlier. Um, so I do appreciate revisiting this for sure.
Just to clarify, Jose, are you suggesting we give time for all of GTAC? It probably won't be in the meeting, but outside of a meeting to revisit the priority
I mean,
issue section.
I think it'd be great. I'm not sure we have the time for that, to be honest, but just having even a conversation about the priorities. But if we can do a quick poll, like, I don't know what the best way to it is. I just know that me personally, seeing how the council is doing things in the last 2 weeks would probably change how I respond to that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so I've heard three things, two that are specific suggestions on the current articulation of the priority issues, and one that is about seeing if we can find time for GTAC to revisit the priority issues. So I'm going to take these separately because I think we can make that happen, probably outside of a meeting. So in terms of the two suggested changes for the priority issues, one was Amy's suggestion to revise the framing of the priority issues so that it's temporal. And number two was Fred's suggestion that in the structure bucket to add a bullet that prioritizes the administration side of the government and directing it to find the efficiencies that you all talked about earlier. Amy and Fred, did I get those right?
Yeah, that's good.
And then second, I think to Jose's point, I am envisioning a upcoming Survey Monkey for GTAC members to capture a few things that are kind of outstanding issues to that we need the content for in the final report. So I do think that we could send out a slightly updated priority issues. And those weren't voted on or anything, so this is not something that needs GTAC action at this point. But I would take, Amy, if you'd be willing, your offer to help on the temporal part, and I think we could add Fred's addition, and I think we could meet Jose's desire to get wider GTAC input on the priority issues now that we've been in the new form of government for 22 days. Bill.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask about the word temporal. It means relating to time. So if we're using that phrase, what are we saying? That it's urgent, time's flying, or
Yeah, mostly just putting stuff in order. Like this group of stuff is actionable from January to June. This stuff is actionable from June to August. This stuff is actionable, and maybe try to map it to what we know right now of the budget process. I just want it to be as like functional a document as possible because they're
Yes.
so inundated and busy that our I just think we're going to be more likely if we're giving really useful information.
Thank you, Amy.
All right.
Yeah, I think that'd be really useful. I mean, it's everything is a high priority, but some of it we're going to have to put off, and that's kind of like the strategic planning stuff, right? That is probably one of our main priorities, both on the budget side and on our, get your form of government in order side. But they're not going to have time for that during this budget process. So making that a high priority over the summer seems like a way to frame it. But I don't want to lose track of stuff that's really important that we just can't do right now is still going to be really important. But yeah, I think it'd be helpful for them in planning what they're going to do rather than just reacting to work sessions.
Thanks, Terry. Amy.
One more just thought I had is that when I think about like the materials we're leaving as GTAC, it's also for like the activists and the folks that are continuing to support council as we move into our role as just being citizens. Like how can we set our peers up for like success? Like here's a map that we laid out of things to think about, and just recognizing that our audience is also members of the public who want to stay engaged and leaving them useful stuff.
Thanks, Amy. Anything else on this? So Amy and I will work on revising the priority issues to add a chronology. I don't know, is that a chronology? Is that a better word? And then we will add Fred's bullet, and I will incorporate an opportunity for GTAC members to evolve the priority issues section in an upcoming survey to members. Did I capture that okay? All right, I love this. Okay, next slide. Oh, you can go too forward. I have notes in that one. So I'm gonna work with Terry and Bill on finalizing the recommendations. We are not going to do wordsmithing as a group, as a full work group, but thank you all. I think we got through amazing content. We will distribute both the drafted recommendations and this agreement around how to proceed on the priority issues. We'll go out to GTAC in early February, and then GTAC will consider and vote on your recommendations at the February 11th meeting. You could go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, the last voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee meeting is next Tuesday, January 28th. All are welcome. It is a very critical meeting. We have a lot of content, but the real goal is to leave that meeting with the subcommittee agreeing to voter education recommendations for future efforts. Really important. I'm looking forward to it. And then the next full GTAC meeting is February 11th, as I mentioned, and Fred and Jose, as co-chairs of GTAC, we'll do the final setting of that meeting, but there will absolutely be time, maybe about a half an hour for this work group to briefly kind of present its work and then to have time for GTAC discussion and vote. Any questions about what's coming next or any final thoughts from folks, because we're a bit early? I know, thumbs up. Okay, well, thank you all so much. This was a fantastic meeting. For those of you with assignments, Amy, Terry, Bill, I will be in touch soon. And for the rest of you, thank you so much for the meeting, and I'll see you soon.
A pleasure.
Bye.